Welcome everyone to our fourth community webinar of the year. This month's topic is Autistic Pride, focusing on autism, gender identity, and sexuality. It is a follow-up to our adult support webinar on Autistic Pride. My name is Bridget Farrell. I work for AsIAm on the community support team, so I'm one of the people that you'll reach if you call our information line. Tonight, we're very lucky to have Ollie Bell from ShoutOut as our speaker. Ollie is a passionate activist for queer rights and social justice. They wear many hats as ShoutOut's education officer and the founder of Trans and Intersex Pride Dublin. If you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to send them in. I'll be collecting them and we'll have a 15-minute Q&A at the end of the night. If you would like to introduce yourself, then let Ollie get started with the presentation.
Yeah. So again, my name is Ollie. I use they, them pronouns, and yeah, so I'm from an organization called ShoutOut. So I've kind of prepared a little PowerPoint for use. So I'll just kind of get that kind of set up. But basically, what ShoutOut does is we go into secondary schools and we give kind of educational workshops to secondary school students, and that's primarily what my role is kind of overlooking kind of the education or educational program. Sorry, could I just, it's not letting me share the screen, so the PowerPoint, so someone could help with that. Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. So, yeah, okay. All right. So, yeah. So sorry about this. Okay, so yeah, my name is Ollie. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm from an organization called ShoutOut. So ShoutOut is a very, we have a small staff team. It's me and two others, our executive director, Ruan, and our training and development manager, Tilly. So again, my role is primarily overseeing the education programs in our secondary schools, which is carried out by our hundreds of volunteers, and it's a very diverse range of volunteers. And in these kind of workshops, we go through the kind of LGBTQ plus acronym. We also share our stories, our own experiences of our school, of how school was, how we came out, and sort of why we decided to kind of do volunteer with ShoutOut. ShoutOut's been going for almost 11 years at this point. So we were started in 2012, and it was a completely different kind of landscape to what we're seeing in Ireland now. You know, we didn't have marriage equality, we didn't have gender recognition, we didn't have so much visibility of the LGBTQ plus community back in 2012. But it was started by a group of college students who they themselves were LGBT and found it really difficult and couldn't come out in school, and they were just wondering, you know, why was it so hard? Why was it so difficult to come out in school at that time? And it was because they didn't have a lot of education in their schools around the LGBT community, and they also didn't have someone come in and talk openly about being queer, about being LGBT. So that's how ShoutOut was started. Started from, you know, the people within the LGBT community who, you know, find it really difficult in schools. So kind of forwarding to 2023 now, we've done over 2,250 school workshops. So we've kind of reached over kind of 6,000 students across across Ireland. And while, you know, some of the stuff where we talk about is quite different, it's still to what we did in 2012. It's still really about sharing our own stories and sharing our own experiences and allowing young people to ask kind of questions about, you know, the LGBT community. Outside of our school workshops, we also do a lot of support around those working with young people, so youth workers, teachers, service providers, that kind of thing. Anyone who is looking for kind of training or just wants to know a little bit more about the LGBTQ plus community and how to support queer youth, we give workshops to them, and that is you know, carried out by our kind of informed by our on the ground experience of kind of what students are saying in our kind of workshops. We also do corporate workshops, and that helps to fund our school workshops. So we don't have a set fee for our school workshops because we think it's important for all schools to be able to access this kind of information and that kind of thing. And then we also do a lot of work with community groups and people, again, who want to learn more about the community. So kind of moving on. So the kind of context. So I know for this particular you know, workshop, there might be a lot of parents, a lot of adults of autistic and or LGBTQ plus youth. So it's important that, you know, we kind of give the context of how school is because that's where the vast majority of young people's time is spent. So our friends at Belong To have their most recent kind of school climate survey, and it sees that you know, 76% of young LGBTI students feel unsafe at school, and that 1 in 3 LGBTQ plus students have skipped school to avoid negative treatment due to being LGBTQ plus, and that 58% of LGBTQ plus students hear homophobic and transphobic remarks from teachers and staff. And so this kind of paints a very bleak picture, a very bleak but realistic picture of what school is like for young LGBTQ plus students. And it is something that we see kind of coming up in our workshops as well, of like students looking for support on how to come out and how to kind of navigate school under these kind of conditions. You know, and because this is from an autistic kind of point of view, there's also some kind of research on the kind of intersections between LGBTQIA+ plus communities and autism. So research on specifically LGBT autistic people is lacking, especially in this kind of Irish context. But what I could find is that a higher percentage of autistic people identify their sexuality as something other than heterosexual, and it's more like they're more likely than the general public to be LGBTQ plus or have a sexuality that isn't heterosexual. And again, trans and non-binary people are 3 to 6 times more likely to be autistic. Now, there could be, you know, a range of different kind of reasons for this, but I feel from my own personal experience as an autistic non-binary person, that, you know, my ideas of gender and how I experience gender, you know, it feels very much like gender is a social cue and it's tied up in kind of these social cues that I don't really understand and that I don't want to kind of identify with. But for, you know, we'll get into kind of terms on the next kind of slide. And, you know, the most important thing to kind of take from this is that, you know, autistic LGBTQ plus young people should be believed and should be supported, and, you know, no matter their kind of identity. So kind of just moving on, this might be, you know, the first time you're hearing kind of these, some of these terms and some of the, seeing some of these letters. And we do this acronym in school workshops. We write it out on the board and we ask students, have you ever seen the acronym written this way? Where does it usually stop? And we're seeing more recently that students are starting to see the longer acronym, starting to see it maybe all the way up to the A, or maybe seeing it up to the I. And we write it out like this, not because we're expecting everyone to go off and say the full 8 letters, but because, this is to kind of look at it in a bit more depth and a bit more detail than maybe you're kind of used to. So I'll kind of go through some of the more kind of familiar terms first. So we have BL, which stands for lesbian, and lesbian is, you may think of lesbian as maybe 2 girls in a relationship, 2 women in a relationship, someone who is a woman, who's only attracted to women. And of course, all these, definitions are fine. They're completely right. In ShoutOut, we have a slightly broader kind of definition of what the term lesbian means. So we say that it's usually a woman primarily attracted to women, either romantically and or sexually. And we say usually a woman to give room and space to people who may experience a bit of fluidity to their gender and may identify as non-binary or gender fluid, but feel connected to the term lesbian because they're primarily attracted to women. And we're seeing this a lot in school workshops as well, that the kind of definition of a lesbian is quite open to a lot of young people who may be non-binary or not identify fully within the gender binary as well. So we have Katie McCabe, a football player. I'm not a big sports fan, but it is kind of relevant to bring up maybe some famous celebrities, like sports people, especially if it's like something that young people are passionate about. So that's one kind of positive representation of a lesbian, especially in the Irish context. Moving on to G, we have for gay. And again, like the term lesbian, we have a slightly broader definition, and we say that it's usually a man primarily attracted to men romantically and or sexually. We say usually a man, again, to give space and that openness to non-binary people or gender fluid people who, feel connected to the term gay because maybe they are primarily attracted to men. You may have also heard gay be used to describe the full community. So last Saturday, you may have heard people talk about gay pride or Dublin gay pride being on. It's also used in that kind of broader sense for the full kind of community. And that's what we call kind of an umbrella term. So a term that encapsulates multiple kind of identities. You may have also heard of maybe lesbians referring to themselves as gay women or gay people. It's also used in that context again. Yeah. Then moving on to B, we say it means bisexual. So this is someone who is attracted to 2 or more genders, or someone who's attracted to multiple genders. Again, recognizing that some bisexual people are non-binary and some bisexual people will be attracted to non-binary people. And we have the lovely Phoebe Bridgers as our bisexual person. Yeah. And then moving on to the T, we have trans or transgender. And this is someone who doesn't identify as the gender they were assigned at birth, or someone who identifies as a gender that differs from their gender assigned at birth. And when we talk about gender assigned at birth, we mean that when everyone is born, the doctor has to put either male or female on someone's birth certificate. And according to how we look, we're either assigned male or female. And for trans people, at some point in their lives, will realize that maybe this doesn't fit, or they don't feel comfortable with that gender. And so they may identify as a different gender. And so we have Nikki Tutorials, who is an example of a trans woman, as someone who was assigned male at birth, but identifies as a woman, will typically use feminine descriptors and she, her pronouns. We have Elliot Page, who is an example of a trans man. So someone who was assigned female at birth, but identifies as a man, will typically use masculine descriptors and he, him pronouns. And underneath that trans umbrella we also have non-binary, and someone who is non-binary is someone who doesn't identify within the male or female gender binary, or someone who doesn't exclusively identify as a man or a woman. And that can mean a lot for for many non-binary people. For me, it means that I would rather be seen as a person rather than a man or a woman. And I feel more comfortable with gender neutral pronouns and gender neutral terms, such as they, them. And so an example of a non-binary celebrity is Sam Smith. And Sam Smith uses they, them pronouns. So if we were to refer to Sam Smith, we may say, you know, they are a musician. I listen to their music. I follow them on Instagram. So instead of using she, her, or he, him, we'd use they, them. So just again, if you have any questions towards the end about any of these kind of definitions, about any of these identities, you feel free to kind of ask them. But kind of moving on to Q, which stands for queer, which again is similar to the term gay. It's that kind of umbrella term, can be used to describe someone's gender or their sexuality, or maybe their place within the community. So someone like myself, for example, I am also bisexual. So I'm bisexual and non-binary. So maybe if I was talking about my experiences, I may say like, oh, I'm a queer person. So it can also be used for someone who maybe identifies with kind of multiple letters within the kind of acronym. And an important thing to kind of bring up with the term queer, especially for people who may be a bit older, it, you know, has a lot of history behind it. It was kind of used, and sometimes still is used, as a slur or as a bad word. So what queer used to mean was, you know, strange or odd. So it was used against the community quite a lot as this kind of offensive term. And it's only more recently that you're starting to see people kind of reclaim that term as something that we call like a reclaimed term, or a reclaimed slur, as a way of saying, you know, you're trying to use this term to hurt me. Well, I'm going to take the power away from you. I'm going to take that hurt away from this word. I'm going to say that there's nothing wrong with being queer, that there's something positive about being queer, and that kind of thing. But the important thing to remember is, for a lot of people, it still does hold that really negative history behind it. It still does feel like a negative word for a lot of people. So if we know someone isn't comfortable with the term queer, we shouldn't call them queer. And we especially shouldn't be using it as a negative term as well. And then I stands for intersex. And at this point in school workshops, when we come to the I, you know, they know generally what the kind of LGBTQ means, but when we come to the I, they may be a little bit confused or have never heard that term before. So intersex is basically to do with your biological sex. It is someone whose sex characteristics, so your chromosomes, your hormones, and or your reproductive organs, don't neatly fit into what we assume to be a male body or a female body. And this can look a number of different ways. It can be something that someone, that the doctor observes at birth. So somebody may be assigned or observed to be intersex at birth. Other times people find out when they go through puberty, and their body may develop in a way that's not seen as typical for their assigned sex. Other times people find out when they are adults and they go to fertility testing, they find out then. And then sometimes people never find out, and it's actually discovered at autopsy level. And the important thing to recognize with intersex people is that, you know, it's not something to be ashamed of. It's not something that's wrong with a person. It's just, you know, a kind of natural variation within kind of humans. So intersex people make up about 1.7% of the population. So to put that in context, it's around the same as people who have natural red hair. So people who are born with natural red hair. Or if we also want to look at it, it's the same amount of people as people who are born in Australia. So obviously there's no correlation between, you know, having red hair and being intersex, being Australian or being intersex. It's just kind of a way of comparing the kind of two populations. Yeah, and Caster Semenya is probably the most famous example of an intersex person, someone who, you know, was assigned female at birth, identifies as being a woman, identifies with the gender she was assigned at birth, but was gender tested and realized that her body naturally makes higher levels of testosterone than what we see with what we assume to be for a typical kind of cisgender or someone who is assigned a cisgender woman or assigned female at birth person. And she has talked very openly about being intersex. And so if you have even have any questions about intersex people, it's someone that you can kind of look up and look more into. Intersex Ireland is a fantastic organization as well. So if you have any questions around being intersex, that would be kind of your first place to go. Moving on, we have the A, which stands for asexual. And this is someone who experiences little to no sexual attraction. An asexual person may still want romantic attraction or romantic relationships or experience romantic attraction, but like that, experiences little to no sexual attraction. And we have representing the asexual community, Yasmin, who is a model, I think. I think she was a marshal at one of the prides over in the UK and was the first asexual marshal at one of the prides there, which is very inspiring to see. And then finally, we have the P, which stands for pansexual. And that means someone who is attracted to all genders or attracted to people regardless of gender. It can sound really similar to bisexual. And what we say in workshops is it really depends on the person. It really depends on what term someone feels comfortable with. If someone prefers to go by bisexual, that's okay. Someone prefers to say that they're pansexual, that's okay as well. And that there's no right or wrong way to be any of these letters. And then finally, there's the plus, and that is just everything else. It kind of works as like an etc. So like I was saying at the start, we're not asking you to say all 8 letters, you know, when you're saying the full acronym. So you can just say like LGBT plus, LGBTQ plus, LGBTI plus, and it kind of makes everything kind of short and quite simple. And the important thing is just kind of add the little plus at the end, so you're incorporating letters that maybe you haven't explicitly said. And it's okay if you're kind of wondering throughout this, being like, oh, I don't know what any of these words mean. It's okay. It's okay to have questions. It's okay to not know fully what everything kind of means. And you know, it is all kind of a learning curve, learning experience for everyone. And I will plug some resources at the end that you can kind of go to kind of look at these terms more. So when it comes to kind of coming out, so coming out is basically when someone, so maybe a young person, maybe you're a young person, comes to you and says, you know, states what they are, maybe that they're coming out as gay or lesbian, or maybe they're coming out as trans or non-binary. It's basically someone being like, this is who I am, and they're disclosing that to you. For a young person, it could be, you know, I've been exploring this, you know, been exploring my sexuality, or I want to explore my sexuality or my gender identity. Or it could be them coming to you and being like, I've done a lot of thinking about this and I realized that I am, you know, gay or bi or trans. And the first thing to do is kind of before even anyone comes out or anyone wants to come out to you, is to never pressure someone into coming out before they're ready. And they could be, you know, and this could look at, you know, pressuring someone to come out could look maybe asking direct questions, being like, are you gay? Are you bi? Are you trans? And why you never want to kind of pressure someone into coming out before they're ready is because this could, push them a bit more back into the closet. It can be very embarrassing. It can be very exposing to a young person to have these open questions and these direct questions kind of asked of them. And, there could be a reason why they're not ready to come out. It could be because they haven't really figured it out. Maybe they want to wait for the kind of perfect moment, or maybe that they're not sure yet what exactly they are. So you should never pressure someone into coming out. But if a young person does come out to you, if a young person, comes to you and says that they are, um, this sexuality or this gender, the number one thing is to take them where they are. And this is a youth work principle. And this underpins a lot of the work we do with young people. It's about accepting the person as they are now and trying to help them face the challenges that they are dealing with at that moment in time. As adults, we may have a tendency to think ahead, what is this young person going to do in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, even 2 years' time? So in our heads we might immediately jump into, what is going to happen to this young person in terms of their future. Whereas for young people, they might tend to think very like where they are in the moment and the particular challenges that they may face in that moment in time. So whether or not, their friends are going to accept them, what people are going to say at them the next day in school, are their friends even going to still be friends with them? And whether or not people's attitudes toward them may change right now. So if they come out, are people going to treat me differently? So taking them where they are now and trying to learn and understand the challenges that they're facing in that moment in time and trying to support them from that, regardless of what happens kind of later on. And, again, we may think, what if this young person changes their mind? What if, this is a phase? And I know that this is something that I even experienced when I came out. And I know it's something that maybe a lot of autistic LGBT people come out and experience that. And I know this from my own experience, like I wasn't believed, I was kind of questioned, and I was told, like, are you sure you want to do this? Are you really sure about your sexuality or gender? And to me, that was it was very embarrassing. I felt like people didn't believe that I kind of knew who I was, and that, especially since like I spent a lot of time thinking about this. I knew I was, bisexual since I was 12. I came out at around 17. So all those kind of years, I kind of knew about my sexuality. I knew about kind of my gender at maybe a later stage. But the fact that I wasn't believed was kind of disheartening. So, taking your young person where they are now and supporting them and kind of coming to the challenges as they arise is very important. And also like the fact that, when what comes later in life will come later. Our lives are fluid, and ever shifting. It's very likely that, our identities will go through kind of changes over the course of our lives, but we can't predict what that young person will feel in years and years to come. But, but supporting that young person in the present where they are now will help them kind of build resilience later in life. So that if things do change for them later in life, they will be better equipped to handle, if they were kind of properly supported when they first came out. You may also want to engage in kind of external support networks in that young person. So that might look like, you know, going towards TENI or belong to, or maybe young, a local LGBTQ plus youth group, or they can maybe get talking to young people who have the same experiences as them, who are kind of going through the same things that they're going through. Or it might be, you know, they might rely heavily on kind of close friends and that kind of thing. And they might rely heavily on them. So that might be you kind of responding to that and facilitating those relationships. You may want to actually, you may need to actively make more time or space for these informal supports like friendship groups, and ensuring that your young person can spend time with them. And making sure that these supports are made kind of available, and that these kind of support groups are good for your young person. And you might be lucky that your school might be very supportive and might have an LGBT group of some kind in school. And it's actually something that we're coming across more and more, that more schools are having maybe LGBT or diversity clubs at lunchtime. And that can be an amazing opportunity for your young person to get some support in schools as well. And finally, as you know, a parent or a guardian, it's also about respecting your own journey. So you may be fearful, you may be worried, and that's okay. It's okay, you know, you may be struggling with your young person coming out, either because maybe you weren't expecting it, maybe it's new to you, or maybe because you maybe do have these kind of worries about how this might change your child's life. And that's okay. It's very normal to be fearful. It's normal to have concerns when something changes in your life. But it's also important that you also seek support for yourself to work through these feelings. And so you may seek support by speaking to friends. You may want to access kind of outside supports for groups of LGBTQ plus young people. It may be also looking towards maybe AsIAm and seeing what supports that they have there, especially when it comes to supporting LGBT autistic young people. And trying to also assure yourself and looking towards maybe public life and seeing more positive experiences of LGBT people, either in your own life or in public life, or through kind of media and stories. Yeah, and you can kind of reassure yourself by looking towards these examples, and you can reassure yourself, like the young person, you can reassure the young person in your life by kind of bringing these examples into the home and sharing these positive stories into the home. And now just kind of some stuff around, you know, how do you talk to a young person about LGBTQ plus identities? And young people, you know, are seeing different family structures, you know, in their day-to-day life. It is, you know, this isn't something that's new to them. You know, they may have a friend who has like, you know, who has maybe a single mother or a single father, or maybe their parents are divorced, or maybe, you know, there's a friend of theirs who has two dads or two moms, or maybe they have a grandparent looking after them, or, you know, a family member, they may be adopted. So young people are coming across very different family dynamics anyway. And this can be helpful in kind of, you know, teaching them that kind of love and families can look different and can take various different forms, and that there's nothing wrong with that. It's also kind of opening up your own kind of expectations and your own assumptions. So ensuring that they know that, you know, sports and activities don't have genders. And it's supporting young people in that. So, you know, if your young girl wants to play, you know, football, you know, ensuring her that that's okay. If, you know, one of your young childs wants to play with different toys than everyone else, that's also okay. And showing them that, you know, clothes and toys don't have genders, and that kind of thing. And that also, you know, your body doesn't define or determine your gender as well, and that it's okay to kind of take your time and figuring these things out. And that kind of thing. And it's also looking towards kind of more teachable moments. So looking for positive stories, positive experiences in your own kind of life, in your own families, and also kind of taking the lead from the young person themselves as well, and taking proactive approaches. So if you know someone in your family who maybe, if you know a woman in your family who's quite, gender non-conforming, showing examples, or if a man in your family is very gender non-conforming or is, more feminine, like showing examples to your young person that, not everyone is the same and not everyone fits into these strictly defined kind of gender norms and gender stereotypes, and opening that up as well. Yeah. And then inclusive poems, so you can learn to speak rainbow. So getting up to speed with a lot of this terminology, and then there will be resources there for families and for parents to kind of and guardians to take away. And it's also being open to learning new ideas. So when I'm giving workshops, sometimes young people like bring up a term that I've never heard of before. And, sometimes young people know more than I do when it comes to these kind of definitions and these new words that people are coming up with. And it's taking them, and not feeling embarrassed that maybe you don't know a certain term, and speaking positively and openly about the LGBTQ plus people and public figures that you know of in these life. So it's also about bringing kind of inclusive media into the home. So again, there will be kind of resources, and we have kind of our pride picks, and so some examples that you can kind of bring into the home as well. It's also around kind of limiting your assumptions. So I know when it comes to kind of raising autistic young people, raising autistic children, I know from my own kind of experience, my parents, my family had very, had expectations about how my life was going to go, even as like someone who was autistic, undiagnosed autistic until I was around, 17, 18, they had assumptions about what my life was going to be like. But it's also kind of like limiting those assumptions and being open-minded about how your young person will kind of flourish and develop throughout their lives, taking an interest in what they want to do with their lives. And it also means, limiting their assumptions about maybe, your daughter bringing home a boyfriend, or your son bringing home a girlfriend, or, your young person being attracted to only one gender. It's also about limiting those assumptions as well. And allowing your kind of young person to be their own person and to develop and flourish. And it's also kind of being chill and following their lead and respecting a young person's privacy and being chill. Sometimes, so I know from my own experience and from a few of my friends, sometimes we just wanted our parents to just be chill, to just accept it, to just kind of take it on board, and just going with the flow of our own personal journey. And sometimes it is just kind of, following their lead, and just showing that you're supportive to your young person. Yeah. And then kind of just more kind of general resources and support. So ShoutOut has our own parents and guardians guide, and this was developed by one of our volunteers who, like I was saying, wanted to, these are the things that his mom wanted. He wished his mom had known or had when he first came out. And so it kind of gives personal experiences from a wide range of identities and experiences, and also goes through a lot of this terminology as well. And then we have our own zine, and this is a nice kind of it's called Blora Ashika, or Queer Voices. It has it's bilingual. It has some Irish, it has some English in it. It's poetry, writings, letters to younger selves. And this is a really nice one to maybe bring into your home, to give a young person who's maybe coming out or, you know, struggling a bit with their identity, to show them, you know, positive role models and positive representation of, you know, LGBT Irish adults as well. Then we have the LGBT terminology that goes through some of the terminology I shared with you then back a few slides ago. And you can come to this, you know, if you're maybe confused about maybe a term your young person is using, maybe something that they've come out as. And this can be helpful to just have in your back pocket to kind of revisit. Yeah. And then we have the so Children's Book Ireland came out with the Pride Reading Guide for this year, and this splits kind of books into age groups. So it's a whole list of kind of different LGBT books. So some are fiction, some are nonfiction, some are, you know, guides and that kind of thing. So these are good to, if you want to look up some books according to your kind of child's age group. And then we have the likes of TENI and Belong To. So TENI are a specific trans organization that they run support groups. They do a bit of advocacy. They also have a helpline that you can ring up if you maybe have some questions about how to maybe support your young trans person or someone who may be struggling with their gender identity. Belong To, again, is a youth LGBT organization, also does a lot of advocacy about LGBTQ plus youth, but also gives support groups. And there's some in Dublin, but there's also ones across Ireland as well. And on their website, they also do have a section on support groups for parents of LGBTQ plus young people. And then finally, just pride pics. So I tried to include some more autistic representation, especially around autistic LGBT people. So on this, we have like different things you can look at, you can watch. So Heartstopper is a really nice one to watch with your young person. So it is about two LGBT guys, you know, being in a relationship, and one of them is bisexual and coming to terms with his sexuality. One is an already kind of out gay boy in an all boys school, and it has a number of characters that are, you know, LGBT. It has two lesbians in a relationship. It has a young trans girl, and it's about their kind of life and experiences growing up LGBT as well. Then there's kind of Disclosure, which looks at trans representation throughout media. It's a good one if you want to look at how maybe trans representation has changed over the years. There's Pose, which might not be suitable for young people, but is good. It looks at kind of drag culture and ballroom culture in America in maybe during the AIDS crisis and that kind of time period. Then Heartbreak High is maybe a little bit for maybe more older or mature young people, maybe more teenagers. And I included this because it's one of my favorites, but it also includes an autistic queer person, a queer woman who her name is Chloe Hayden, and she's an autistic advocate, and she herself is an autistic woman, and she plays Quinny, who's an autistic queer woman in this show. I think it's a good piece of representation of kind of that lived experience. And then there's kind of books as well. So The Transgender Issue by Sean Fay is a good one to read if you maybe want to learn a little bit more about trans people, especially when it comes to trans, the media and maybe other kind of people are saying about the trans community, and kind of debunks a lot of the kind of fear mongering and the kind of misinformation that's spread about trans people. And then I've included kind of three little three book recommendations, and specifically a queer autistic perspective. So there's Nanette by Hannah Gatsby. She also has a lot of comedy, she has comedy specials on Netflix, but this is about her experience growing up queer, but also being diagnosed as autistic and ADHD as an adult as well. So it goes into that as well. Then there's Spectrums, which is about autistic trans people sharing their own experience and sharing, you know, what it's like to grow up, you know, autistic and trans. And then there's Gender Identity, Sexuality, and Autism, quite similar to Spectrums, goes into LGBTQ plus autistic people, and you know, the intersections around sexuality, being LGBT, gender identity, and that kind of thing. So those are some things if you want to do some further reading on this. And then that's it for me. I hope you learned something from this kind of webinar, but if anyone has any questions or anything you want to ask, feel free to this is your time now.
Okay, so we'll open it up to questions. One that we got in, are there any tips on how to help a teenager socially transition, as there are very few medical options available to teenagers?
Yeah, and that is completely understandable. I think, I guess, kind of when you're helping a teenager socially transition, I think maybe linking them in with the likes of TENI, Belong To. I know Belong To has a trans group, just so they can kind of make friends and kind of have that more like friend support, but also like giving them the space to kind of explore their identity, you know, wear the clothes that they want to wear, maybe wear their hair they want to do, if they want to wear makeup, that kind of thing, and helping them, you know, and you know, also kind of using their name and pronouns that they want to go by. And I know it can be quite it can be, you might make mistakes with that, and that's okay. You know, we say that, you know, if you do mess up someone's name or their pronouns, you know, you just kind of apologize, move on, and kind of also trying to maybe go away and kind of practice on your own, so that when you're kind of talking about that young person, you're kind of using the name and pronouns that they want to go by. But also just showing that you're supportive, just, you know, like that, taking them where they are now and supporting them, and also, you know, knowing, supporting yourself as well, going and reaching out to maybe, you know, reading our parents and guardians guides, you know, talking to maybe people from TENI or Belong To, looking at maybe support organizations as well, so that you can kind of do some that work yourself and help kind of understand how best to support your kind of young person kind of socially transitioning. So okay. So what else do we have?
If it's not a so just a answer to a general question. This is being recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel. If you want it before it's on the YouTube channel, you can email into the support line and we will get the recording sent out to you. Okay, that's a good question. What's the difference between gender non-conforming and trans?
Yeah, so I guess gender non-conforming is quite a broader term than trans. So gender non-conforming basically means you don't conform to the conventional kind of gender stereotypes, gender norms, that kind of thing. And this can include, you know, people who are cis, so people who aren't trans. So maybe you're a masculine woman or a feminine man or androgynous, but you also kind of identify with the gender you're assigned at birth. So, but also this can include kind of trans people. So a trans person, so a trans man can be, you know, gender non-conforming in the way that maybe he's more feminine or androgynous. Trans women may be more masculine or more androgynous again. So it's a broader term than just kind of trans is. I hope I'm explaining this right. And it can be the way you kind of dress, the way you kind of present yourself, the way you carry yourself. And it's that more kind of broader term, whereas trans is about how you kind of feel on the inside, how you experience your own kind of gender as a gender, as a different gender to the gender you're assigned at birth. And a trans person can be, you know, more conforming to, you know, femininity, masculinity, or they can be gender non-conforming as well. It doesn't, the two don't kind of rule themselves out different from each other. So I hope that kind of, answers your question.
So it is something that's come up a few times. Why do you think, and obviously these are personal opinions of Ollie and myself as autistic people who have their own experiences with gender, rather than the stances of ShoutOut and AsIAm, fully conjecture. Why do you think that autistic people are more likely to identify as part of the queer community, as trans, as gay? And I'm willing to share my own opinion on this as a queer autistic person.
Yeah, I think when it comes to the ideas of social cues and social presentation, I think, and from my own experience, I remember growing up and not getting why there was such this separation between boys and girls. I didn't get why, you know, it was boys on this side, girls on this side. I didn't get why, you know, I was expected to act a certain way. And for me, I didn't realize at the time, but that was because I didn't understand and I didn't get these kind of social cues. And also, I think when it comes to being autistic and also queer, I remember when I was diagnosed as autistic, I was also kind of coming to terms with my own sexuality, my own gender. And I remember thinking like, well, I'm already weird. I'm already being ostracized because I'm autistic, you know. And for me, it was very much like, I'm so sick of hiding myself. I'm so sick of thinking there's something wrong with me that I'm just going to come out. And I decided that I was kind of like, you know what, if people don't accept me as trans, you know, I'm just going to find people who do. And I think it's also that fact of like, for a lot of autistic people, we're already ostracized. We're already, you know, different. So for me to kind of come out, I was kind of like, well, I'm already different anyway. So this is just an added thing, you know. But also I think around kind of social cues, and we're less likely to kind of hide who we are, and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Just to let Ollie take a break from talking. It's been a long hour. I think as an autistic person, and I do identify with the sex that I was assigned with at birth, but it's never felt like it was in a straightforward way. Like, I much more identify with the idea of older sister than woman. Like, the things that I identify more with are concrete roles that I have. Woman seems vague and broad and isn't necessarily something that I feel. And when I was discussing it with other autistic people when we were creating our teen resource, it's almost as if I am a brain that is piloting a body. And if my brain were to disagree with my body, I'd certainly be on my brain's side. So I could see where someone who the way that they felt didn't match what they were assigned at birth, I could see that if I didn't think that I matched what I was assigned at birth, I wouldn't present as that.
Yeah.
So there are a few questions about being intersex, as it is something that's also a medical condition.
Yeah.
Why do we include it in the queer community?
Yeah, I think specifically why we kind of include it in ShoutOut workshops and in, especially when we're talking about, doing school workshops, is because we do have a lot of intersex volunteers. And what they were saying to us was like, well, I wish, someone came into my school and talked about being intersex so that I didn't feel so weird. Because also it's not really discussed a lot. It's not talked about in schools, like as well, kind of the wider LGBTQ plus community isn't really talked about in schools. So we kind of listened to the volunteers that wanted to talk about their own experiences of being intersex. So that's specifically why ShoutOut talks about intersex, or why we kind of include it in the acronym. As for a more general kind of why it's included in the acronym, you see a lot of, the intersex people facing a lot of the same stigma, a lot of the same oppression and discrimination as the kind of wider LGBTQ plus community. So the likes of not being a real woman or being a real girl is something that even Caster Semenya came across when she was discovered to be intersex. So her privacy was completely, disregarded, and it was leaked to the press. And, suddenly people thought it was okay to kind of question whether or not she was a real woman because she was intersex. And that's something we see a lot with trans people. It's something we see a lot with non-binary people. So of course, the experiences are quite different, but there's a lot of overlap when it comes to the specific challenges that intersex people face. And the idea that, there's nothing wrong with being intersex, it is like sexuality, like gender is a, natural kind of variation within kind of humans. Yeah.
So going back to your discussion about how to support young people who are coming out, it is very important to accept where they're coming from and support them from where they are. But how do you balance that with the responsibility of a parent to make sure that they're safe and consider their future? And it can be what the child wants for that not to be considered, as most teenagers tend to live in the present. But how do we balance being supportive with considering their future?
Yeah. And I think it's also kind of allowing them the space to explore their identity, to explore, the way that they want to dress, the way they want to present. And I think, when it comes to, because you hear a lot around kind of, young people and, transitioning. And I think it's like, you want to give them the space to explore and to know that, you love them as who they are, and that this is a part of themselves. I know it's so understanding to be worried about your child. And I know it was something that, my family was worried. They didn't know what it meant. And I think kind of being open with your young person, and knowing that you're not on your own with this, that you can reach out to other people, you can reach out to support groups, and talk through it as well. And that you don't have to do this by yourself. Yeah. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. I think, yeah, giving them the space to explore and support them means that, you know, if something does change, that they feel comfortable coming to you, and that you're not going to be like, oh, I told you so, or, oh, I knew it was a phase, you know, that they, you know, being open and honest with your young person, and knowing that, you know, if something does change, that they do feel comfortable coming to you, and expressing that.
And I feel like I'm giving you a nice, easy one to finish off with. But for our first one, or last one, sorry. What is dysphoria as opposed to being trans, and can they happen outside of each other? And how can you support someone who's experiencing dysphoria?
Okay,
Nice little
yeah.
softball to end the night.
Nice, easy question. Yeah, I think you hear about kind of gender dysphoria a lot, and I mean, I'm not I'm by no means an expert on you know, the kind of dysphoria as kind of a medical term, but from my own understanding, it's kind of that discomfort you kind of feel with your gender not fitting with your kind of physical body. And this can, like, dysphoria can be, you know, a wide ranging kind of thing. So it can be about maybe your voice or the way your body looks, or even it can be about how you're perceived as well. So like there's like social dysphoria. So the idea that, you know, people misgender you or misname you, and that causes, you know, that causes kind of distress. And it's like not all trans people will experience that like distress, or that it might not be as intense as some people, but you know, for some trans people, it does mean taking steps to maybe medically transitioning, or socially transitioning, or legally transitioning, because even transitioning it isn't just a one size fits all. It isn't just the kind of medical interventions. Sometimes it is something as simple as like changing your name, changing your gender marker, or socially transitioning, changing your name, coming out to people, that kind of thing. And so again, a trans person's kind of idea of their dysphoria will, you know, be kind of different across the kind of board, but it's kind of that kind of distress that comes from your body maybe not matching your gender identity.
And I would just add to that, my sibling is non-binary, and one of the things that they said to me that really stuck with me is that we focus so much on trans people's gender dysphoria that we need to support them more in gender euphoria, in the things that make them feel happy, that there's happiness in being trans, that there's safety and peace that can be found in it. And we need to help them get to that place where they can feel safe. And hopefully we're building a society where that's much easier.
Yeah.
So just to finish off, I'd like to thank Ollie and ShoutOut for giving us their time.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us on.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you. And the webinar should be up on our YouTube within the week. But if you need it before then, if you'd like to share it, you can just email support@asiam.ie and we'll send it out to you. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Having a good night, everybody.
Night.